Good afternoon, and welcome to the feedback loop. Welcome to the first of this academic year's Communitas lecture series. I'm Alexis Sand. I'm a professor of art history in the Department of Art and Design, as most of you know. And I just want to start by acknowledging a few of the people and organizations who helped bring us together here today. The series, Communitas, is organized by the Department of Art and Design with the generous support of the Marie Eccles Kane Foundation Russell family, the Tanner Charitable Trust, and differential tuition funds provided by students of the college. That's many of you, so thanks. The series was launched under the leadership of Dr. Laura Gelfand, who worked closely with our committee chairs for visiting artists and exhibitions, Professor Kathy Pusey and Dr. Marissa Vigno. Support from Dean Dr. Craig Jessup and his office, and from production services, has been indispensable to the success of this series over the past year. And I also want to extend a special thanks to the faculty who have invited the visiting artists and done so much to organize their lectures. And for today, that's our own Todd Hayes. So kudos to all of you. So last year, we hosted 9 speakers representing almost every area of study within the department. Students had a chance to hear from and often meet such luminaries as Carrie Mae Weems, a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and interior designer and author Sheila Bridges, who is an internationally recognized leader in the contemporary design field. This year we will host 7 more artists and scholars, ranging from the curator of last summer's most talked about art exhibition to a pair of art educators who are challenging high school students across the country to explore the question of who is American now. So Edith Turner, the anthropologist who, with her husband Victor Turner, formalized the notion of communitas, describes it as, quote, inspired fellowship, a group's pleasure in sharing common experiences, being in the zone, as in music, sport, and work, the sense felt by a group when their life together takes on full meaning, end quote. This series' emphasis on artists and scholars whose work and lives engage with ideas of equality, diversity, and togetherness is intended to foster our common pleasure and to take us into the zone. So I want you to sort of hold on to what you hear this afternoon and move that out beyond these beautiful walls into conversations and interactions that you have with your peers and other members of this larger artistic community. So it is with real pleasure that I introduce tonight's speaker, Beth Lowe. Beth recently retired as a professor of art at the University of Montana, just up the road in Western terms. She taught there for over 30 years. Her work, which focuses on themes of childhood, family, Asian culture, and language, is collected and has been exhibited internationally, and she is the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions, including the United States Artists Hoy Fellowship and an artist grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to working in ceramic and mixed media sculpture, Beth is also the author, with her sister Jenny, of 2 children's books, which, thanks to the kind offices of John Neely, I have here. They are Auntie Yang's Great Soybean Picnic and Mahjong All Day Long, which actually is an award-winning volume. And as if this very abbreviated list of Beth's impressive record of accomplishments were not already making us all feel a little inadequate, I should mention that she is also a recording artist as a bass player and vocalist for the Big Sky Mudflaps. Here is the LP, Sensible Shoes. And in that capacity, she's appeared on the Today Show and Prairie Home Companion, as well as on stage at the Cool Jazz Festival, among other venues. So according to its website, this is my favorite factoid that I'm going to tell you tonight, the band has been Montana's premier wedding band for over 40 years. That's a lot of weddings. So it is with real delight that I hand over the mic to the multi-talented Professor Lowe. But before I go, I just want to remind students enrolled in Art 3710 to swipe. I'm still working on the move, so I'm just going to pretend I swipe. To swipe on the way out. And don't get confused. If you swiped for Aggie Passport, that is not attendance for the class, so make sure to swipe. Magnetic stripe faces right. Here's Professor Lowe.
Well, thank you, Alexa, and especially thanks, Todd, for being an incredible facilitator for this. Really made it easy for me to come here and do this, and to John Neely, and to Dan, who I don't see here. Dan, anyway, we had a great dinner last night, too, and they took us out to hear some great music. And so far, it's been really a great visit, and so I just want to thank you all so much for having me. I'm going to show a bunch of slides of work that I've done over a long period of time. I won't say how old I am, but it's been a while. So the work that I'm going to show is organized according to content and not by date. So it's not in chronological order, but it's just the kinds of work that I've done over my career, and hopefully it will make some sense in terms of content. I do a bunch of different things, primarily ceramics, so I'll just go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to try to remember not to look up there, just to look on the screen here. So this is a picture of Glacier, Montana, and I just wanted to say that coming to Montana, I was born in Indiana to parents who immigrated from China, and coming to Montana was really important to me for a lot of reasons. One is the landscape itself. It's the first time I felt like I developed a relationship with landscape. And secondly, Montana is so empty that there gives you room to start something or to try something or to figure out what you're about, I think. For instance, when I moved to this little town of Hamilton, it was one stoplight, and we started an art co-op, and that hadn't been done. We started a food co-op. We taught pottery classes. That wasn't available. We started a band where I didn't know how to play an instrument. So when there is no competition, you can try stuff. You can be the first to try something. So I feel really grateful to have that be part of my life. And then I studied under Rudy Audio for my graduate degree, and he was a person who was just an incredible role model. He's just one of the all-time greats, legendary kind of ceramic professors. I think you got one here, too, I will say, Mr. Neely. Somebody who was maybe a potter before it was fashionable, and somebody who really had a lot of integrity in what he did. And then in terms of more specific influences, he was somebody who opened the door to drawing on the surface of ceramics. So he was an important person for me. I started doing ceramics by being in love with throwing on the wheel. It's something that takes you out of yourself, and you lose track of time. It was the first time that had happened to me, and I was hooked. The first class I took was a community, Parks and Rec class, and on a treadle wheel, and I just went, whoa, this is just incredible. So I did a lot of reduction firing and earth earth colors, earth tones. And then little by little, I started to try some other kinds of things. And the piece on the right is the first piece that I felt like I did something that was a little bit of a self-portrait rather than just sort of design. And that you can't, I don't know if you can recognize it, but the composition is organized like black hair, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and the eyes are real slanted. And to me, it felt Chinese, and it was like the first time that I sort of thought about being Asian, have an Asian personality. The things that happen to me that affect my work are usually things that happen to me in my life. So after doing sort of decorative work and vessel work for quite a while, I got pregnant and had my first child. And when I was pregnant, I didn't want to do ceramics, so I started drawing. And then after the baby was born, I still wanted to just kind of draw. And so I drew these, for me, pretty large head portraits with oil pastel. And I wanted it to represent how I felt like that was all I could think about was this new human being that I'd brought into the world. And I wanted it to feel like the way Mao's face is on Tiananmen Square, just like huge. So it's larger than life. But some things showed up in this that, like when you have done a lot of work, you look back and you see things that show up later. So the hands, I do a lot of stuff that emphasize the hands, and those origami boats in the front. I remember the first thing that I said when Ty was born and I saw the baby, I said, "Oh, he looks Chinese." And so the Chinese influence started to come out. So that was a long time ago. So there he is, 31 years old. And I don't know how that time passed, but that's my son and Glacier. And the first pots that I started making after Ty was born were these stacked, ovalized vessels. And the sensation that I was trying to get at here was the idea that this is all-encompassing, like you can't get this human out of your head. So it was almost like a leech or a parasite, but this baby was like on my head at all times. And then there's a couple of little things to note, which are the crossed fingers for good luck. There's a lot, you get a sense of everything being very precarious. I had this, after Ty was born and after I did that big figurative head, was the first time that I actually sort of did drawings on the work rather than design. In terms of influences, another person is Frida Kahlo, and what I loved about her work when I saw it, I immediately loved it, and even though she's like on purses and knickknacks now, I think she's a really important artist in our culture or in world culture because, and she was like when somebody does something in the art world, it gives you permission to do something similar. So she was a person that did work about her cultural background. She did work about her own psychological state, including her psychological pain, and the phrase "the personal is political" was started around the time of her work, where the idea that what you have personally experienced has a political ramification, and she was highly political herself, and so this artist was influential for me. Another little influence as I was raising my child was just having a child gave me an awareness of family, race, and culture, and as I got over just the amazing innocent quality of this child that I had created, I started to become a little bit anxious as a parent about what did it mean to bring this new person into the world. And these posters that were in the socialist realist tradition in China show these kids that were like impossibly good. They're all helping the revolution. They're really happy. They're real positive, rosy-cheeked, healthy children that are ready to do good for the world. So the issues that I started thinking about in terms of raising my own child were morality, ethics, and from then I started to use the image of the child as a symbol of, first of all, innocence, that feeling of when the baby's first born, you can't believe how pure that child seems. Potential, like, oh, my kid is going to be the best he's clearly talented, he's clearly intelligent. You see this incredible potential of what he can be. Vulnerability, the fear that comes, at least for somebody who's semi-neurotic like me, worrying about what could go wrong, either from outside sources or from what you do yourself as a parent. And then lastly, thinking about what it is to play. And I think you learn that a lot from a child. So the image of the child started to appear in all of my work. And first, it kind of appeared in 2 dimensions. And I did a whole series of these good children platters. And in this particular series, I talked about work and play and the difference between those. One child says in Chinese work, the other child says play. They're doing the same thing. And I think that's really what our goal is for our work to become our play. And that's where you get art, that's where you get genius, where that creativity comes out. Here's another one. We got this little kid, he's at a dance party or something, and he's saying play, she's saying work. The work started to become 3-dimensional, and I even remember having a little bit of a decision to make. Can I make these 3-dimensional, and is that still, is that valid or something? It's funny how you stop yourself and sometimes from trying things, but I ended up doing a lot of 3-dimensional figures. The Chinese do a lot of writing on these big calligraphy on mountainsides, and so this piece is just called Boy, Girl Standing on Mountains, and they have the little red scarves, which are the revolutionary Red Guard kinds of scarves, which my family had to go through some of that Cultural Revolution. These are some more good children. This particular manifestation of my idea had to do with the term, with music, which I am involved in, and there's a little boy with a lapel pin, a flag, and the little girl's wearing a Mao button. And I made this piece in 2008 when Obama was criticized for not wearing a lapel pin. And I wanted to just say that there are all different kinds of allegiance and patriotism, and that there's so many different ways to be patriotic. And what if you're patriotic to Mao? What does that mean? And then I chose 2 words, harmony, which I think is more Chinese, and anthem, which is a little bit more Western, and thought a little bit about how music will raise your emotions. So that's what this piece is about. And the little boy's got this nice little electric guitar. The work went into some functional or semi-functional, semi-sculptural pieces. These are good children teapots. So you can take the head off and you can drip a little tiny spot of tea out of the arm. And these are salt shakers. And these are just some pottery forms. I made some of these little people cups there and some onigama ones this is a strong wood fire community, so there's some onigama ones there. And I think that after a certain period of time of sort of working with the idea of my son and taking imagery from my son's life. To a certain extent, I started taking this and saying, well, this is my identity, this is my childhood that I'm talking about. And I had always, growing up, born in the United States, Chinese parents, I had a fair amount of identity crises, as much as teenagers go through a lot of stuff, but I was not totally comfortable being an Asian American, being a minority in a very white community. And so it's taken me actually having my son to make me appreciate my parents, to make me appreciate what do I want, what Chineseness do I want to pass on, what is that all about, and to recognize what my parents went through in terms of coming from the United States to America and embracing a brand new life, and what it's like to try to fit into a different culture. So all those things started happening. So this piece is called Red, White, and Blue and White. The blue and white refers to blue and white porcelain tradition in China, and red, white, and blue, of course, refers to the flag. And these figures, which is more me than my child now, slowly come to embrace the Chineseness. Here's a close-up. There's rice in each of the tubs. And she's got this nice red and white striped bathing suit. This next piece is called Nature and Nurture, and the figures are pretty identical, but one of them, if you see the outline of the base, one of them is the US and the other one's China. Map of China, can you guys see that? Another influence is kitsch ceramics, and I always think I have a pretty good size collection of Chinese kitsch ceramics, racist ceramics, and I always think it's kind of interesting that a person within that culture can collect these without it being racist, or I can make a racist joke myself without it. I mean, my friends and I often tell Chinese racist jokes. So I heard from a Southern girl, I heard a good Southern girl joke last night, so I will tell one racist Chinese joke for you guys. It's a riddle. So how do you know when a Chinese robber has been in your house? Thank you. Your dog is missing and your math homework is done. So I have another one, but maybe I'll save it for the end. I got a couple more, but anyway, they're something that you can that I feel totally comfortable telling. Comics are a big influence on me too, maybe partly because humor is important to me in my work. But Little Lulu was my favorite because she was a girl and she was tough and she often outwitted the boys, but she had girl characteristics, and I think that there's something to that. It's different from women. You know, women are different from men and girls are different from boys, and I think there's something about girls that's very interesting to me. So that's something that I have always liked Little Lulu for. There's a lot of good comics in this world, but that's a particularly good one. So with the idea of cartoons, I've done a lot of stuff with speech bubbles. Speech bubbles are a really good way to get content into work because you can put text in, or you have your characters saying something, whether it's visual or whether it's actually written. These pieces are very much about how the industry, there was made in China or made in Japan. Those were like cheap, crummy items. And I'm not then also thinking about myself, how I was made in the USA, but, what is my race or what am I made up of? These pieces, they're all slip cast, by the way. This piece is called All Look Same, and these are 4 different Asian ways of saying same: Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and English. And there is a website, or there used to be a website called alluxame.com, and you can go and they just show you faces and then you guess which race they are. And I tried it and I got less than 25% right, which is like not even random. It's like I couldn't have just picked all A, I would have gotten more right. So I think it's interesting. Sometimes I think I can tell, but not always. Anyway, this piece, all look same. This piece is called I Am an American. And the figure is slowly it starts out yellow and it slowly gets absorbed by the red, white, and blue. This piece is called More, and it's about overpopulation or the yellow peril or whatever. And the characters say, lots, even more, way too more, way much more, and too much. And this piece has no text in it, but this is a more recent piece, and this is about multiculturalism. So the United States, the different colors of the United States represent skin tones, and then the little kid, ironically, is holding a do not enter sign. And this is a piece about accepting people into our borders, or the current administration's not wanting to accept people into our borders. Sometimes I wonder about art in general and about irony. Like, do you guys read that as pro-immigration or anti-immigration? Anti? See, so I'm not sure how sometimes you don't know how what your work is coming across. But this is ironic. This is the idea of, like, my sense is that I let the America be in different colors because that's what I want. But you got this little kid going, but he's Chinese himself. Another influence is calligraphy. This is an artist named Xu Bin, a contemporary artist, and these are all characters that are not real characters. They're just done with strokes that look like Chinese characters. And he's done this whole bunch of work and installations. This is an installation where the entire text in this room is written with these illegible Chinese characters, and the whole bottom row is filled with books that are written in this non-Chinese script. He's done lots of really great work that all deals with Westernization and Chinese culture and the basic traditions, subverting the basic traditions of Chinese culture. But calligraphy in general is really important to me. It's a really important part of Chinese culture. Like if you were a civilized person, you had to practice calligraphy every day. And it was more than just doing your penmanship. It had a moral tone, it had a aesthetic, it had philosophical overtones. It was an important part of your education to be able to write calligraphy correctly. And every stroke had a name. There's pressure, there's how you lift the ink, how you mix the ink. It's very ceremonial. So some of these pieces, bamboo is another interesting part of Chinese culture. So as I got more into family issues, I also got more into the culture of China. So bamboo is really important. It's written about in poetry. It's hollow, so it's philosophically like it's strong, but it's hollow, so it lets things go through. It bends with the wind. If you read the Tao Te Ching or something, bamboo is in most of the poetry. It's also edible. You can eat bamboo shoots, and it's also incredibly strong. So if you go to China, they still will build skyscrapers with bamboo scaffolding. You can also make things like fans and delicate work, tools with bamboo. So bamboo, there's quite a bit of bamboo in the United States, which I didn't know at the time. So I slip cast bamboo and made this piece, which is called Jiating, which means family. And then on the surface of that are other characters that read things like, be a good child, respect your parents, brush your teeth every day, don't hit people, be good in school, all the do's and don'ts that a parent would teach a child. Going back in time, but also not just another influence is origami and mahjong. So these are porcelain pieces that are just hand-built to look like origami. And these were things that I did as a child, played with the mahjong tiles, played mahjong, the game, and sometimes just build with them like blocks, and built and folded origami. This next one is foreshadows something that I'm interested in more recently. So these are origami forms that are painted and gold leafed to look like they're folded out of funerary paper, which is paper that is burned when someone dies. And this particular paper with the gold is supposed to represent money. So you burn that so that that can go into the next life. So this is another piece called Still Life with Winds. And this was done actually when my father died in 1993. White is the funerary color. It's not, you don't wear white at a wedding. You wear red. So this is this was a little bit just about his passage. I've got a couple other pieces about that too. This is another aspect of Chinese culture, which is Buddhism, and in particular the hand gesture and the mudras. And then this is a series of work that I did, mixed media work. So these are large sheetrock pieces. I discovered sheetrock. I was telling the people in the workshop that I discovered sheetrock when one of my students left a big slab of clay on it, and then when they pulled that clay up, it pulled the paper off the top and left a beautiful mark. So everywhere where it's brown, the top paper is pulled through, and the brown of the cardboard shows underneath that. And then below that is the white of plaster. And I like the hand because it has a quality of greeting and also of farewell, and it also is extremely personal. It's like next to the face. It's the most personal part of yourself. And on these pieces, I've got some stuff with fingerprints, which also deal with identity, and the attachments that are sort of attached, like the origami birds. They are sort of, I want it to have that same feeling of sort of parasitical or whatever, or leech-like sticking on there. The work is organized with a lot of sort of visceral emotion. And some of these pieces have hardware that's pounded in sort of sideways, like the screws and stuff are pounded in sideways, so that they just stick in there when you pound them in. I like to go to the hardware store and rummage around and find weird stuff. And then there's this little hand inside the big hand, which also has a mother-child feel. I also feel like the center of the hand is very vulnerable in feeling. And I feel like the hand is found in so many different cultures that I thought it was a good symbol. This next little group of slides has to do with socialist realism again. So some of the work that I've done is done in that style. So this is from China. This is in Tiananmen Square also. And I just like this sort of heroic quality that is portrayed in this style. This next piece is another slipcast piece. As I said, after I had my own child, I started to appreciate my parents a lot more and what they'd been through. And this piece is called Legal Aliens. So it's two versions of my parents, and their faces are painted sort of neutrally with these kind of speckles to indicate kind of an alien face. And it was the idea that they had just gotten citizenship and they were still aliens. They still had to call up and say, if they wanted to rent an apartment, they still had to say, well, we're Chinese. And sometimes they would get turned away. So I was always aware growing up of fitting in or not fitting in, and what that boundary is, and what their sensitivities were in terms of that. went to China for the first time in 1995 and have been to China about 4 different times. And my mother has a particularly incredible family. They're really, really welcoming. So when we go, usually maybe 50 or 60 people come to go out to dinner. And they'll rent a restaurant, and then they have to start taking pictures. And so you get together and you take all the Year of the Cow pictures, and then you take all the older generation with the younger generation, and then you take all the couples with the older generation, and it just goes on. And Chinese are really happy to get in front of the camera. They're not like us, which are camera shy, and somebody wants to take a picture and everybody goes, "Oh, don't take any more of me." They just will pose, and you see that in Yellowstone now to this day. They just strike a pose. So this was the older generation with the women. That's what this picture was. So before dinner, you eat, you take pictures, and then after dinner, what I love about this picture is that the older generation and the younger generation are just so comfortable with each other that they can just collapse on each other. Anyway, my family is great, and the first time that we went, they just did nothing but give to us, and they had nothing. They were wearing Mao jackets still, and they were living in concrete Soviet-style apartments, and they had very little in the way of worldly goods. And we brought them suitcases full of things like ballpoint pens or stick-on toys or duct tape, all this stuff that they were just astounded by. And they would get all the family together, and they would go around the room, and each person would pick something. It took hours to go through this gift present giving. And what we did for entertainment is we looked through their scrapbooks. So as a result, I did this series of images taken from their scrapbooks. So it's called the Family Album Series. This is the family posing in front of their house, one of the first times that they had cameras. And you can see, once again, they're really happy to pose. They line up. This piece is called The Wedding Portrait. This was during the Mao era, when the only ceremony that was allowed, there's no religion allowed in Maoist China, and the only ceremony that they were allowed was to exchange their Mao buttons. They also, the only kind of goods that they were allowed to collect were Mao buttons, and when we expressed interest in them, as almost in a kitsch way, they gave us all their Mao buttons. They, just like whatever they had, they gave. Coming back to the United States, this is another portrait of my dad got out of China first, and then my mom came a year later, and they had to spend a year in Bombay. This is called the Ladies of Bombay, and this is just commemorating their period of time waiting for a Swedish ship to carry them during the war out of India to the United States. And I did it sort of to look with that kind of advertising script to say 1945 on the side, to give it a feeling of a roadside marker or something. I wanted it to have that kind of gravitas. So my parents have meant a lot to me, and in a way, looking at them more now than when I was growing up, seeing them better. And my mother, this is my mom, and she is a self-taught Chinese painter. And so one of the things I started doing was, I think I told the class, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but when I had my first show with all those family album portraits in it, my parents wouldn't come to the opening. They saw the show, but they wouldn't come to the opening because they felt it was too much about them, and they were self-conscious, and they didn't want people to ask them questions. So I started thinking, I'm not really paying tribute to them, I'm taking from them. And I think as artists, we do a lot of taking, and we need our time, and this is important, and we're doing some good for the world, but there's an awful lot of self-need in some of that. So I started thinking, well, what can I do to give back really to my mom? And the one thing I thought of it is we could collaborate. And so over the years, as she's come to visit, we've worked on pots together, which is fabulous for me. It's so much fun. We put Patsy Cline on the CD player, and same CD almost every time. But we listen to music or the Chinese, some of the Chinese music that she listens to. How many people have seen Crazy Rich Asians? A few of you? Anyway, they play my mom's favorite singer in that movie, Grace Chang. And it's like super weird because it's real Chinese, but it's real westernized too. And that edge is something I'm really interested in. It's what we export and what they want out of our culture. Any case, these are a couple of pieces that we've collaborated on. And then in the nature of collaboration, the books that I've collaborated with my sister on, the illustrations are porcelain, because I tried watercolor and I just don't know watercolor well enough. And in porcelain, I know how to erase. I can just scrape it off or sponge it off. And it's so much easier for me to work in porcelain. So we just photographed these plates. And then also you have this nice functional object afterwards, which is a little bonus. Here's Auntie Young's Great Soybean Picnic, which just got made into an Illinois Reads book. And also the Illinois Agriculture Department bought 80 copies and distributed them to all the public libraries in Illinois. So we were pretty pleased with that. But they're both true stories. They're both stories very literal about growing up Chinese American, missing China, and my parents missing China, and what they did to keep their Chinese culture alive, to play the game of mahjong. Or the soybean picnic is about they're discovering that you can pick soybeans before they usually harvest them in Illinois. They usually harvest them when they're late September, when they're kind of dry. But if you pick them green, then you have edamame. And these people in Illinois, nobody was eating edamame. So they went to the farmer and they said, can we rent a corner of your field? And they did this for about 15 years, and by the end of the time, 250, 300 families were coming to rent the farmer's field, and then there would be this enormous potluck. And it became a really major cultural event in the Chicago area. So thinking about soybeans as well, and about Chinese food and what it means, what food means to a culture, I did this piece, which is just called Soybeans, and the installation is between none to 25 soybeans on a plate, and there is the word, there's the number written in a bunch of different languages, and it's to visually give the image of who has and who has not, and wealth and dearth of food in the world, one of the most basic, very healthy foods. So that's a piece about soybeans. And a different angle on it, and this is more recent work, are these plates that deal with food. And in this particular case, it's about, I call these pieces How to Speak Chinese or Learn the Chinese Language. But the words that I'm giving you to learn are all the words that are for foods that the Chinese have stolen from the U.S. So they never had, this is hanbaobao, sala, Coca-Cola, Sanmingzhi, and qisa. So it's hamburger, salad, Coca-Cola, sandwich, and cheese. And I don't know, I think qisa in particular is very funny. So I'm interested in what other cultures take from Westernization and how things are translated and what the meanings are. And the best one, of course, is Coca-Cola, because not only does it sound like Coca-Cola, but it also means it makes the mouth happy. This is butter dishes. I made a couple of these in the class today. And I find this interesting because butter translates as huangyou, which just means yellow oil. So I think that's interesting. And just a couple other things. Here's another version of hanbaobao, which is this poor girl is having a stomach ache after eating her hanbaobao. And then there's fei zao, which is just soap, so that's a soap dish. And then hao chi, which means tasty, and that's like a sushi plate. So when you think about, in pottery, when you think about what you make, you think a little bit about what is it useful for and how can you make that even stronger in what you might put on it in terms of a 2D. So one of my trips to China, we went to Jingdezhen, which you have a program here where you're allowed to take students to China. And I think this picture is funny because I think it looks like we're like in the prison workshop or something. But the thing that I took away the most from it was celadon. I became enamored with celadon again. First of all, in terms of what it does when you carve it, and this is a technique I learned called double carving, but mostly in terms of using it as an image of water. And as I sort of moved away from making work specifically about raising a child and moving more towards an autobiographical approach, I started thinking about my own attraction to water for its life-giving and its life-threatening properties. So sometimes I use it as a way of evoking that soothing feeling of water, and sometimes, like this piece, I use it as a way of being threatening. So these are little babies that the celadon is painted up to their chins so that they're practically drowning. A couple more images. And then this particular piece, the celadon is halfway up on these swimmers, and this, if anybody's ever done the I Ching, this is a hexagram it's the hexagram for water. So it's broken line, solid line, broken line, broken line, solid line, broken line. And since I'm taking too long, I won't go into it anymore. But it's a philosophical text, basically. And it's called Water, the Abysmal is the name of that. This piece I made for Korea. And it's got these fans that blow the water in those plexiglass pans, and the water reflects up and it glimmers on the figures. And this piece is called Breath, and each figure has a little gold leaf breath bubble coming out of its mouth. Here's another piece that involves water, again, plexiglass with colored water and slip cast swimmers. And then onto the pottery, the water imagery with these little swimmer cups, these little kids floating or swimming in the water. And this piece, which I call dip cups or dip bowls, which if you filled water to about the middle line on the inside, all the feet would be in the water of the little figures on the inside. And then the last sort of little change or shift, most recent shift in the work, has to do with the fact that I'm not only aging myself, but I'm also taking care of my 99-year-old mother, and there's been a lot of illness and end-of-life issues that I've been kind of thinking about more and more. So the manifestation into my ceramics has to do with legacy and inheritance and what you pass on, and that sense of what's next for the people who are, my offspring and my relatives that are younger than me. And And this image that you're seeing is an example of a variety of funerary papers that you can buy in almost any Chinatown. They're great printmaking, like if they're so cool. If any of you printmakers, there's just so many great images. And some of them are literal and some of them are figurative and sort of symbolic. And I did a fair amount of just straight copying without even knowing what the symbols mean. But some of these images on these plates are directly from funerary papers. And I put them on these little bowls and on these figures. And I talked about how I'm trying to paint more on the figures as well. And on this series of cups. They have these little paper clothes that they put in these envelopes, and they're so dear, they're so precious, and you're just going to burn these little tiny sets of clothes. It's really it's very powerful work, and it's cheap, just popular culture stuff. And then the other imagery that I've sort of taken comes from these. Some of them are export porcelain. They're mostly relatively recent, and they have imagery that indicate wealth. Like they show on the vase, they paint another vase, or they paint, furniture, fancy furniture. So when you buy this pot, it's sort of like, I'm wealthy, I can afford all this. It's kind of showing the ownership. And the two things I like about it are that sort of self-reflective imagery that you put on it, and then also the fact that these pieces look like they're patterned, but they're not actually symmetrical. They have different objects painted on, but it comes across as pattern. And I'm a very lazy pattern person. I love the feel of pattern and patterning and fabric, but I don't want to do it. I want to do different stuff in each corner. But you can compose it the way it feels like a pattern. So these are pretty large coil-built vases that have both the funerary imagery, the good children, and the vases on them. And some of them have sort of Chinese landscape painting on the vases. So these are just different versions of those. They're usually called inheritance vase or guardian vase, or I forget what other term I use, but something that indicate legacy vases. And I like to do them in pairs because I think that they sort of act as guardians, and that's a very typical thing for Chinese. So I coil build them. For you technical people, I coil build them using a template so that I can make more than one. So this is, in addition to my ceramics, as was mentioned, I do also play the bass. So this is like 1981. And that's Tom Brokaw. Remember Tom Brokaw? Any of you guys remember Tom Brokaw? And this is the Today Show. And we were just this funky band from Montana that got to play at the Cool Jazz Festival and the Today Show. And this is what we looked like then, and this is what we look like now. And I have this piece, which I'm saying, xie xie, thank you. And this piece says, the newspaper is our friend. And I do like to have some political impact of my work. And so I'm very much concerned. I think my issue is the freedom of the press. So I'm showing this. But I have a very few quick little things if I can. So I called this the Oscars and the Razzies. So these are, I think a lot, especially in university settings, about what is success. So I think there's lots of different ways for work to be successful. So I'm going to kind of show you what I think is the best and the worst, or at least there's only a little bit of the worst, but there's... Anyway, I think the best work that I showed you is this piece. It's called the one that's called Flood, and the one with the little kids. I like its power. I feel like people have responded to it really well, and it's very honest for me. So it fulfills a lot of requirements for what I think is really good work. I think this is some of my other best work. It's large, it's ambitious. These are like, full-size pieces of sheetrock, so they have impact. And they were also very raw in terms of, after my dad died, what I wanted to put out there. So I think that's some of my best work in terms of just power and impact and emotion. And I think this is the worst piece that I showed you. And this piece I was commissioned at the Korean Biennale, and I just was trying too hard. So the fans and the water, it was just like, I got to be multimedia, I got to be contemporary, I got to do installation. And I think it's way too complicated. I said, I'm going to leave the fans and the chords showing. I think that was dumb. There are other ways to solve this, and I think it's too complex and there are too many issues. So I think this is the worst piece on one of the biggest stages that I've been on. So, what do you do with that? You learn or something. In terms of most successful, these sell like hotcakes. So these, I can't make enough of these. These are the most successful in terms of public response. People really like these. In terms of the most satisfying, I think the collaborations are the most personally satisfying to watch, to see what my sister felt and what my mother felt working together and sharing the joy of creation. That's maybe the most personally satisfying. Maybe the most important is work that has a political edge to it. This piece is about gun control, and the little girl in front is just holding a pistol, and the figures are black with the red US. And then what I'm most excited about is the color red. And so that's recent work. I'm usually most excited about the most recent. So that's all I have, and I'd be happy to take questions if there's time.
We have about 3 minutes for questions.
Oh, yeah.
Were there any challenges associated with working with your sister?
My sister, I'm lucky, my sister is 2 years older than me, and she was the kind of sister that was really happy to take care of me from early on. So we've been pretty much best friends forever. So in this particular case, it was about as smooth as it could be. We really had a good time doing it, and she's got a couple other books in the works, and I could foresee that there could be some problems in the next few books, because I don't like the text as well so far. But I think we'll work it out. Yeah? I think he's a little bit in denial. But I started to feel, in the same way that I started to feel about my parents, that there was an attitude of taking and exploiting in doing work about him, which is why I transferred a little bit to thinking about my own childhood and childhood in general. And he's really a good sport, and I think every so often he says, "Is that me?" He will say that occasionally. But I think that when you do artwork, you have to think a little bit about what responsibilities you have, or that's the way I feel about it. I was just talking to my husband David about a book that a friend of his had written, and it's all about the divorce that he went through with his wife, and I feel really terrible about. I know the wife, and I feel really terrible that that's in the book, and it's probably vivid, it's probably honest, and it's probably engaging, and it's probably successful in terms of the book. But personally, I don't think I want to be careful in my own life. I feel my responsibility to my family is greater.
One more.
Yep.
I've noticed in a lot of your pieces have a mark under one eye. Is there a meaning to that?
I forgot to repeat the question. I was supposed to repeat the question on all of these. So she asked if there's a significance to the mark under the eye. And there's a couple reasons for that. And the first is that my teacher, Rudy Audio, did it. And I just straight out copied him. But I figured, well, I didn't copy much else, so maybe that's okay. But the second reason, and what works for me, is that it gives a life to the face, and it separates it from all my linear drawings. Without that mark, the face, the line quality becomes very flat, and the face, the white of the face blends with the white in the background. So putting that little mark gives that face a little bit of three-dimension. And somebody in class today said it's childlike too, because I think of the round cheeks of the child and add some color.
Well, let's give Professor Lowe a big hand.
Thank you.